Welcome to another episode of Innovation and the Future of Pharmacovigilance, a podcast series brought to you by Trudient Talks. I'm your host, Indy Alawalia, and I'm delighted to navigate the dynamic world of pharmacovigilance and risk management with you. But first, a quick disclaimer. The opinions expressed in this episode are solely those of the individual guest and do not necessarily reflect the official views of Trudient Consulting or their own company. We're all about fostering insightful conversations here at Trudient Talks, and we want you to know that any product, vendor, or service mentioned does not imply an endorsement. If you're seeking professional advice for specific situations, we encourage you to go to our experts. Please remember this podcast content is meant for informational and educational purposes only. Now that's out of the way, let's get back to the show. And today I'm really excited that we have Bill Ringbloom, who is Senior Director, Head of Global Patient Safety Technical Solutions at AstraZeneca, as our guest. Bill, thank you for coming onto the show.
Indy, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here, and happy Friday to you.
Happy Friday. Well, it'll be Monday when this goes out, so happy Monday.
It's Friday today, though.
So, Bill, this is going to be an interesting question. I normally ask this question to every guest. How did you get into PV?
And I'm going to wager that I'm going to give you a slightly different answer than you typically get when you ask that question. Okay, so I've been in PV now as directly in PV for 8 years. Yeah, about 8 years. And it actually all started with my first 5. I was in IT. I was a business partner in our R&D IT group, all here at AstraZeneca. And then during the pandemic and our experience in the pandemic and the work that came through our organization in the pandemic, I moved into global patient safety directly and took this lead role of, we call ourselves Global Patient Safety Technical Solutions, but traditionally it's the concept of your PV systems team, right? So all system ownership and application maintenance and evolution and roadmap build, implementation, all that runs through my team. But previous to PV, if we go all the way back to my education, I'm a businessman by academia standards, right? So I have a couple of different business degrees, operational degrees, accounting degrees, and then I have my MBA. And for my first 8, almost 9 years of my post-collegiate career, I was actually a financial planner for Citigroup.
Wow.
So working in the finance industry, managing funds, managing receivables, managing all that kind of stuff. When we get to about the 2008 year, and the market situation at that point in time was not so well, I had begun to my attention began to waffle on finance, right? Like, it's very interesting and it's very aggressive, but it just wasn't really suiting my fancy at that point in time. Again, the market was not very good at that point in time, and Citigroup at that point had begun, well, for those that remember, at that point in time, Citigroup was the largest corporation I think the world had ever seen. We had like 120,000 plus employees, right? So I worked for a very specific division, and you really didn't know what was going on in all the various divisions around you. But what ended up happening was, with the market situation beginning to deteriorate, Citigroup began basically centering themselves around a core set of services. And the division that I was working for was not a part of those core services. So they were looking at rebranding and selling it. So I and a number of colleagues that were working for that particular division at that point began exploring opportunities elsewhere. And what had happened is I had led. So when I left Citigroup, I was actually no longer managing funds. I moved into an IT role, an IT facing role. So I moved from basically a money manager to, after receiving my MBA, they moved me to headquarters. And the job that I took there was called a field liaison, which basically is the conduit between I was the person that knows what's going on the shop floor, if you will, how our money managers are interacting with our clients. And I was the conduit between us and our information technology teams that were providing the very outdated mainframe computer system that we used at that time to manage our receivables. So a bit of a training aspect, a bit of a requirements facilitating type of person, but that is where I became introduced and working within a project-based setting and around technology and SDLCs and project delivery and implementations and all these kind of things. So I did that for a couple years, went from business analyst to manager to business analyst, project manager to program manager to portfolio manager. And then one of my colleagues left and went to a CRO, and he was doing financial reconciliation. Basically, we had a big laboratory operation. So it was samples out the door, therefore invoice goes out the door as well. And they were looking at implementing an ERP system that was on the market at that time. It's no longer on the market. But I had actually facilitated the implementation of that for Citigroup. And they were looking for somebody they were looking for somebody that had the very specific implementation experience with that particular product. So I was connected to the hiring manager. I successfully obtained that role. Voila, here I am in life sciences working in the CRO.
Wow.
The interesting thing that happened there is the project that I was brought in to implement was canned about 3 months into my tenure with this particular company. And I thought at that point in time that I would be back out and maybe reapplying at financial institutions and rethinking what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
But they decided to take a gamble on me, and they put me in charge of a project. Again, this is 2010, to implement an e-source capture system in our phase 1 clinical pharmacology units. So literally taking pen and clipboard out of clinicians' hands and supplying them with, well, today it would be a very small tablet of some sort, maybe even a phone. Yeah. But in 2010, it was big, huge convertible Lenovo laptops that weighed like 7 pounds, and we had to like buy harnesses for people. Let's just say it was a very, very bold ambition that we had, but the technology wasn't there. The peripherals weren't there where they needed to be. The integration prowess to things like this is a clinical pharmacology unit. So you have vitals machines and EKG machines, and you're looking to integrate with all these things, right? So like the Internet of Things wasn't really as powerful as it is today. So there's a lot of tether, like crazy stuff, Indy, like literally buying like almost like fanny packs for clinicians to put all their dongles in to hook up to Welsh Allen blood pressure machines and stuff, like a pretty crazy thing.
Yeah.
What it did do for me though is, I say this all the time, if you are interested in drug development and you have the opportunity to spend a significant amount of time in a phase 1 clinical pharmacology unit, you will get the best crash course in drug development you will ever get anywhere else, because you see it all unfold right there in very, very rapid fire succession, right? So phase 1, it's dose, collect. Have a nice day. So you see it all. You literally watch the sample get drawn, taken to the lab, to be spun down, to be taken to storage, to get placed in a freezer, to be shipped out later that day. You see it from beginning to end, all in the span of a couple hours, because it moves very, very fast.
Wow.
So I worked on that project until 2014. And that's when, actually, it was a colleague of mine that I worked with at Icon. He was a business partner of mine. Left the CRO to come here to AZ. And he contacted me about 6 months after he departed and informed me that AstraZeneca was changing their footprint and moving from R&D from Wilmington, Delaware, here to Gaithersburg, Maryland. And as such, numerous people didn't follow their jobs. They opted to take the separation package and stay based in the Philadelphia area rather than picking everything up and moving here to Maryland. That opened a door for me to enter AstraZeneca. So now the transition to PV hasn't even really started yet. So I come to AstraZeneca and I took a job as a program manager, right? I was a bench program manager for R&D, meaning next project up, next person available with suitable skills, you get the assignment. So I was running clinical projects. I was running risk management projects. I ran one safety project. I won't take too much time about the details, but it was a pretty big, sizable project. And it was the first time I'd ever experienced safety in my life. So that kind of it was an intake solution consolidation. So I got to learn a lot about how local operates with global. And well, to be completely frank with you, what local versus global even meant at that point. I didn't know anything about this. I knew nothing about PV. So I delivered that project. And then the IT group at that time changed the way that they were structured. We were typically structured in a regional way, right? So R&D and it's still by and large this way with AstraZeneca. The R&D hubs are here in Gaithersburg, Cambridge, UK, and Gothenburg, Sweden. And that's where the bulk of the R&D resources reside in those 3 hub locations. So IT at that time was scheduled where we had a Sweden team, a UK team, and a US team. And we crossed borders to a certain extent. But one of the things that was really problematic for our organization at that time is we had people working with clinical operations people in Sweden while we had people working with clinical operations people in the US, and we were building parallel things. So sometime around I guess it would be the 2015, 2016 time point, IT changed their structure to become capability facing as opposed to regionally facing. So now you have a safety team, a regulatory team, a clin ops team, a data management team. And I applied for and received the lead business partner role to be the global patient safety business partner in IT. Mm-hmm. So I did that for 4.5 to 5 years, learned everything about safety you could learn, of course, everything about the technology and safety as well as the operations in the business and sort of the deliverable of the function itself. And then the pandemic came. That could be a whole podcast in of itself, what happened there. But I think everybody knows we had a vaccine, right? I think people are somewhat aware of the story of our vaccine, and it was a very tumultuous period. We're still operating on a very old homegrown custom solution that presented a whole host of problems for us dealing with this particular product. And that really began shining a light on the need to do something about our systems. Mm-hmm. Right? We need to upgrade in some way. We're acquiring companies. We have bold ambitions of all these molecules to be delivered. We're doing acquisitions at a greater rate than we've ever seen. This 15-year-old, clunker of a system just kind of wasn't cutting it anymore. So that's when we really started looking at transformation. What are we going to do to move out of the legacy systems into a new modernized estate? And at that point in time, that's when Global Patient Safety decided that they wanted somebody like, I guess, me at that point in time to kind of sit as the head of the technical solutions team to kind of put this strategy in place. Mm-hmm. And I applied for the role, and obviously I successfully was offered this role, and I took it, and I've been here for now almost 3 years. I've been in this role.
Wow. And what's the link between your role and old IT?
So I actually partner very closely with IT to this day, right? So they're kind of the delivery of the way that our working model works is naturally we as Global Patient Safety drive strategic direction. Mm-hmm. And then I partner very closely with, he's actually the person that's sitting in my previous role as IT business partner. He and I work very closely together to make sure that IT understand what our short, medium, and long-term strategy is. And then we work collaboratively together to define solutions and sort of implementation approaches to meet those objectives.
Got it.
So I still work very, very closely with IT, like daily interactions, multiple times a day interactions.
Okay. So it's just an extension of you're the partner of the IT business partner, essentially. He's yeah, okay.
Yep, correct. Yep. So all technology implementations, like the actual technology, infrastructure provision, mm-hmm. data privacy assessments for cloud computing arrangements, validation of integrations, and all those types of things, that's all done within our IT teams.
Got it. I have 1,000 questions, but the first one that came up to my mind was you started off in finance and obviously you came into life sciences. There must have been some synergies between, because I've always assumed there were synergies between finance and life sciences in regards to having regulators and stuff like that. But I've never actually spoken to someone who's actually done the flip. So here's my opportunity. What are the synergies between finance and life sciences?
I remember, so at the risk of sounding crass, and I hope I don't come off as such, I remember in a graduate school class so many years ago, one of the professors said, he made a statement. I'm probably not nailing it verbatim, but the message is there, was anybody at the big boy table, and I don't mean to be gender specific, but anybody at the big boy table understands money. You don't get there if you don't understand money. Mm-hmm. And being a younger person, that didn't really resonate with me, right? I'm just trying to get a degree and learn some stuff and get on with my life, right? Flash forward to now, it's funny. I make the joke, and it's probably not a joke because it's true. I may spend more time thinking about financial matters now than I did when I was a financial planner. Right. So look, when you're asked to run something, to run a business operation, that business training, it's more than just the finance stuff, right? It's that business training. How does an organization work organically? It's valuable. It really is. And then when you think about this type of a role where, yes, a large part of our role is what I call run, just keeping our systems up, keeping them performant, keeping them available, right? Keeping the work, keeping the throughput going through at the acceptable levels. But there's also an evolution, a strategic build component of this, right? So I find that my financial background and that understanding has benefited me greatly when it comes to writing investment proposals and getting approval to do things such as this massive technological transformation that we're doing right now.
And actually, another point that you said, we'll get to the big transformation piece in a sec. I'm sure there are people that they only will forward to that bit, but one of the things that you're talking about was strategizing and how in your role now you have to strategize for the next year, 2 years, 3 years. Has it become more difficult in the last year with the sudden availability of AI and the fact that technology is changing at just the most craziest rate at the moment? And how do you strategize for something that, quite frankly, you just don't know what's going to happen next year?
It's extremely difficult. It really is. And I think probably the number one factor that we work against when it comes to these types of AI and automation and these novel large language models and generative AI and all these things is we can't implement it fast enough, and it's still incredibly complex, and there's not a lot of low-hanging fruit, at least in my organization, when it comes to that stuff, right? Like we are impeded by things like, well, data availability is a big impediment for us, right? So I can't do a lot of automation of tasks if I don't have access to the data that I need to do that, or the data that I need to train a model to do that. And we're working through that as an organization. What is our data strategy? You hear a lot of talk around like master data modeling and management and data lakes and all these kind of things, right? And I know what we're doing. This may come up when we get to the transformative stuff. I know what we are doing as patient safety when it comes to getting our data in a way that's, we use the word fair, which is an industry term. I'm sure everybody knows what that is, right? The fairification of our data. But that's only going to take us safety so far. Unless we get ourselves into a situation to where our data is in where the other meaningful R&D data that we want to use to make our decisions and do our analyses, then I use the term data supermarket a lot. Like people in my organization are probably sick of hearing me say that, right? But that's my vision, is a data supermarket. I can walk in. Of course, there's controls and governance around it, right? It's not a free-for-all. I understand that. But this concept of I should be able, as a scientist or a physician, go in and say, I'd like to look at this and maybe some of this. And what did that trial say? And is there a support program associated with this? Like I should be able to go in and kind of pick and choose that kind of stuff. So the concept of the data supermarket is only relevant if there's other products over and above safety on those shelves, right? So I don't need to go to a supermarket if my data is already in my pantry. I can get it right from my native systems. So you ask a little bit about where do I partner with IT? This is a big area where we are partnering very closely with IT to try to get a view of what is the broader data strategy here. Where does safety fit into it? And then what time point are we looking at to maybe make some meaningful progress on some of these? We have no shortage of use cases. There's no shortage of a use case. Everybody's hungry to test and experiment and explore. We just, frankly, we're struggling to stand up those foundational pieces that we need to do that work in a meaningful way. So we're kind of stuck at foundation. And that's impeding our progress to supply these things with the speed with which our senior executives are desiring them to come online.
But that's no bad thing, especially in safety where you talk about your system, which is 15 years old. But if we're being pretty honest here, the systems that are out there are newer systems in the past three years, but it's been dominated by two companies for the last 20 odd years.
Yep, exactly.
And so actually, technological change in PV has been very slow until the last 3 years again, where it's been incredible rate, and there's been incredible failures as well with implementing some of this technology. So actually, being at a foundational base is not a bad thing, I guess.
To build on that, and this is actually generating insights for me. Or there are a little conversation here. I would so I should disclaim, we do have a fair amount of automation in our operations. We do. We've made a pretty significant, and I'm very actually proud of the work that we've done in the ICSR space. And we've even done a bit of work in using NLP to do literature surveillance and stuff, which those are two very exciting things that we did. The latter, I'm not aware of anybody else that has a fully operating agent doing literature surveillance. There's no human involved in that process until an article is flagged for review, right? But that first initial scour of our database is done by a robot, which is really, really exciting.
Yeah.
So now where I'm coming to is, I think, and I hope I see this to be true at the end of this work that we're doing for the remainder of this year, the learnings that we've got from trying to figure out how to implement these things and the things that we successfully implemented is putting us in a better informed situation to understand what our foundation needs to be to build these things in a more rapid way. Right. So I never even really pieced that kind of cadence of intelligence build together until we're sitting here talking through it right now.
And actually, I was just thinking, what's foundational to AstraZeneca, not what's foundational for necessarily safety, because again, safety has been done in a particular way for such a long time.
Yes.
And even when implementing software, we see it a lot. I've seen it throughout my career where people will keep the same process, but shove a new piece of technology in and expect it to do better.
Yep. Don't ever automate a bad process. Look at your process first and make sure what you're automating is what you should be automating. And that's tough to do, right? And especially with, I mentioned, I have a 15, now going on 16-ish year old custom built application. Custom built meaning not just the tech, the processes, the way that we work around this system are all completely custom. And that change management is very hard when we're talking about we want to question our processes and look if we're doing things in the optimum way. It's very, very, very entrenched. This is the way we do the work here at AstraZeneca. So I think we've made really good progress on that over the last couple of years, frankly, because of some of the challenges that we've had. So we are going into this transformation initiative with a higher palette or willingness to accept change in what we're doing here, procedurally, technologically, footprint, where people are sitting, those types of things. So all of that is aimed to change drastically with what we're doing here. And the other big thing that I'm hoping that we get out of this is, I don't want to be in a position to where we're sitting with a same version of a system year after year after year after year. We have got to get to a place to where we can continuously deploy upgrades to systems to keep them current throughout the life cycle of their use, right? So we're also trying to limit the amount of peripherals that we build around our system that we're putting in. We want everything to be in the same shop, because if we're going to get to a continuous delivery model, it's better that everything's in one place as opposed to managing change through a bunch of peripherals that we've bolted onto it. So it is very much trying to get to a place to where the statement that I made the last time I spoke on this a couple of weeks back is compliance is just routine. Ideally, post this, right? Like, I don't want to spend a bunch of manpower worrying about LT, license to operate, and regulatory upgrades and these types of things. All that we should have processes and a way of working with our solution provider that we can do releases in a repetitive right? Whether we schedule them and say that it's 2 a year or 1 a year or 1 a quarter, we can come to that. Even if we need to get to an agreed upon cadence of things, I just need to be in a position to where I'm not struggling to upgrade my systems. I need to be able to do upgrades, keep my stuff current, and move on to transformational type ideas.
Mm. So the one question I'll ask before we get into the actual transformation, which I'm sure everyone wants to talk about, but there is a risk versus reward on these big journeys. What has been the appetite for risk within the business safety group compared to maybe IT, whose risk ratio may be slightly higher, I would assume?
Yeah, you're right. The risk ratio in IT is let's higher or lower. IT is much more accepting of risk than we are in global patient safety, right? Because at the end of the day, whatever we put into production is what we have to live with, right? So I'd be lying if I said we don't have, and anybody that's done this knows that this is the nature of doing this type of work, right? Like we definitely have challenging conversations sometime about what we need versus what we can wait for and when it's coming, and delivery timelines versus productivity gain or productivity inefficiencies. Like we're constantly circling around these time points, and when we're saying we're going to drop a release and what's coming with that versus what isn't coming with that. And right, I tend to become more interested in what isn't coming as opposed to what is coming, right? The isn't coming stuff is where you need to put other workarounds. I hate to use the word workaround because it sounds so negative, but you do need to put, I'll use the word again, a peripheral, whether that's a tool or a technology or a process or a report or a spreadsheet. It's all those things we have to work through as we are trying to balance the MVP mindset with the fact that we actually have a production to run here.
So let's get to it. This is a huge transformation for safety. Why don't you?
I believe this is the largest global migration or the largest cloud migration in PV that's been done in industry.
I actually think that's true. Yes, that's true, and it's going to be. I don't know when it will ever be superseded in the next couple of years. It will be many years before I think it will be superseded. But why don't you give a quick tour of what's actually happening?
Yeah, sure. So let's start with, as I said, I've been in this safety and in this particular journey now for a few years, right? So I won't go all the way back to where it started. Let's start. I typically start this with the pandemic, but I've already noted here that the pandemic was a way to shine a huge light on our systems or a massive sort of risk. And that was kind of like the catalyst that put us into this transformation mode in the first place. So post-pandemic, we did a lot to kind of bolster our systems during the pandemic, and that I cannot say kudos enough to the teams that participated in it. It was a monumental piece of work to deal with that particular situation. But we really didn't do anything to address the core issues with our system. We basically gave it some horsepower to make sure it could take the volumes. I say that, and it makes it sound like I'm diminishing it, and I want to say again, it was a massive amount of work. But it left us kind of in the same place we were at before the pandemic. So we still had the same questions. What are we going to do about this situation? Because fingers and toes crossed, we never have that situation again, but it kind of showed you that anything's really possible, and your disaster recovery plans sometimes aren't as solid as you think they may be, right? So during the course of the pandemic and the years following, we unleashed what we call our bold ambition. Our bold ambition is to deliver 20 new medicines between now and the year 2030. So a massive growth objection in AZ. We started buying things. The Alexion acquisition came in 2021. That was kind of like, in my experience, that was kind of like the first that kicked off this wave of we're going to be buying things. We're going to be buying things. We're going to be looking to launch new molecules. The volume is coming, right? So now we have AZ sitting in a 15-year-old custom system. By the way, I'm not a true global system because I don't have Japan in my global system. AZ Japan sits figuratively and literally on an island. They have their own PV operations, their own technology estate, their own case handling partner. All of that is a distinct business unit in Japan. So then we have Alexion. Same situation. Another system, another case handling partner, another group, all these types of things. So unification was kind of front and center in what we need to do. We need to get off of old systems and we need to unify our organization to prepare for what's coming. So that was kind of like the first immediate initial catalyst to kicking off what we're doing, this massive migration. So just to give some specs around the actual, like the size of it, it is 4 million case files. I believe it is 4 million files, 7 terabytes of data being taken from an on-prem environment in Stockholm, Sweden, to a cloud environment hosted by our vendor. So massive, massive, massive transition. I noted this when I talked about this last week, just because I think it's really cool. We talked a little bit about PV is kind of maybe a bit antiquated in the way we think about certain things, right? And one of those things is we don't really ever throw anything away in PV, right? Like or like you hear life of product plus 7 years. Ours is our records retention policy is actually life of product plus 50 years, just to be on the safe side. So it's very true. We don't ever throw anything away. I shouldn't say throw away. That makes it sound like you're just kind of pushing it into a waste bin. It would all be done under careful consideration, of course.
Yeah.
We are actually disposing in a compliant way, aligned with our global records and retention policy group. We are actually disposing of 18 terabytes of data in this migration.
Wow.
There's a little bit of a nuance to that, right? So the way that our old system catalogs files is we save every single version as a distinct version of that file.
Oh, I see.
So we went and sat with so if you think about it, our records retention policy is acceptable use, only keeping data for the time point that you need it, don't keeping replicas of it. There's risk associated with that. So we were actually in offense of our records retention policy by saving all those outdated previous versions of files that we didn't need to save.
Got it.
So we sat down, we talked to our records and retention group. They agreed with us wholeheartedly. And we were able to only migrate the most recent version of the case in my legacy system, plus the audit trail. And we have everything we need. And we can dispose of, again, 18 terabytes of data. So I just think that's kind of cool because we have sustainability goals and carbon neutrality and compute power to keep all that data and what we're paying to our outsourced service providers, because you're paying by the storage. So I just think that was just, when I was asking the team for some fancy statistics to kind of give in these types of talks, they didn't give me how much we threw away. But when they showed me the numbers, I was like, where'd the other 18 kilobytes go? Just out of curiosity. So it's these little benefits that we see coming out of our program that we didn't even tag to our business case. We didn't assume that we would be meeting a sustainability goal by disposing of a fairly sizable amount of our information.
And that's something that you wouldn't even go into a big project even thinking about, to be fair.
Absolutely not. But it's things that we'll definitely celebrate because I think this is the third forum that I've mentioned that in, and I always get literally a gasp. I gave this speech in a room a few weeks back, and the room gasped when I said it. We disposed of 18 kilobytes or 18 terabytes of data. Literally met with a gasp in the room. It was kind of funny.
Do you think with this transformation thing, the project, there is a risk of perfectionism from business, essentially? The fact that you have this custom system, this custom process, you're moving to a completely new system. It's probably, it will have gaps because of your process. There will certainly be gaps.
Yes.
How do you deal with that as a leader when you're dealing with these sort of situations where there are gaps and it's just you had a specific process before?
So, being completely honest, I actually think this is where me not being a longtime lifer in PV and safety is actually a benefit. because I'm not mired by 15 years of this process or this system. I'm using poor choices of words here. Mired is a very negative term. That's the wrong word to use. I'm not living with the experience of 15 years of this very specific process. And let's also say that we've been in this process for 15 years. So by and large, this is the way PV is done at AstraZeneca. So we don't really have a hugely solid understanding of how this is being done elsewhere. Right. So if we're not getting this, then surely this is a task that needs to be done. How is it being done elsewhere? So we don't really have a lot of visibility to that too. So what I'm getting at this is why I'm pointing this out as a level of complexity is the gold standard we're comparing to is our legacy systems in most cases.
Yeah.
Right. The question is, well, how does that do it? And I have to constantly keep reminding them, we're not asking how that does it. We're asking what we need to be and how we should be doing it tomorrow, not asking how were we doing it yesterday. And then back to the, not being a lifer comment, like sometimes I'm asking very ignorant questions just simply because I don't know. And it actually helps. It helps move. Why are we doing that again? Right. I'm sure we all have this sort of like this experience every so often is you ask a question that you think is maybe even get you laughed at a little bit. And then you realize there's not really a clear answer to that question. Why do we need to do that again? Is that actually the regulation or is that just how we're doing it today? So it's definitely a tricky process. I will say that I'm actually really, really, really happy with my counterparts and their willingness to kind of be creative in how we're approaching certain things. Right. So the MVP mindset is, I think, alive and well, but the problem is certain things are obligatory. You don't have a choice. You have to do this task, right?
Correct.
So it's those kind of things that we really do spend a lot of time thinking about. How are we going to live with this? Can we live with this? If we are going to live with this, how do we do it in a way that doesn't completely deplete our efficiency or our productivity? So it is a constant process. And we talk about this at least 3 different times a week. We have sessions around exactly this: change control, change management, requests coming in, requirements, solutioning to those requirements, system. I'll use the word gaps and limitations, things like that, right? Because as you said, Indy, there are going to be some things that we aren't going to get, at least in this first iteration of release. So we just need to sit down and be very, very mindful of exactly what it is we can and can't live with. Another really good thing that we have is we have an equally as long relationship with our case handling partner. And they have been fantastically cooperative and collaborative in this process. So actively joining us, sitting next to us in these conversations about, well, can we live with that? If we were going to live with that, what would that look like on the case handling floor? So that has been a very huge asset for us too, is just that collaboration and that very mature and open relationship with our case handling partner.
I also wanted to just go back to another point that you'd made earlier, which was about you deciding that you needed to go to a SaaS solution. Maybe I'm paraphrasing here. You needed to go to a SaaS solution, and that you have decided that the best course for AZ is to go to a one-stop shop. Now, there are 2 trains of thoughts here, and this is just generally out there for safety at the moment. There's the thought that you go to a one-platform system, or you go to a SaaS solution, which ultimately should be able to integrate with absolutely everything.
Yes.
And it means that in the future you can pick and choose. So you can, we talk about gold standard systems all the time, and that actually in PV it's very hard to integrate gold standard systems. But ultimately we should be in a situation within the next year where you should be able to say, I want the best literature system, I want the best this system, I want the best that system.
Yep.
Was that conscious decision simply to get the foundations correct, or was it, and what are your opinions on this whole debate about going to a one platform system versus multiple SaaS vendors?
Good question. So buy versus build versus all eggs in one basket versus the differentiation of your partner network, those types of things, right? Yeah. And I don't think there is one sort of like silver bullet answer to this, right? Because you're always managing, right? Technology strategic direction is different than the business's strategic. It just is. It's different, right? So ideally, technology would like to reduce the number of partners that we're working with and reduce the number of contracts they're managing, reduce the number of systems we're maintaining and upgrading. But for us, I want best in class across the board, best in class. What does it the best? That's what I want, right? So for me, and I'm only giving my opinion, if you talk to my business partner in IT, he would probably have a very different sort of response to this. And we work very collaboratively together on this. This is about laying down the foundation system that does the task that everybody in industry needs to do. So back to my comment about buy versus build. You buy what's routine, right? I should be able to buy a system that can collect my cases, house my reporting rules, send cases to authorities and partners per those business rules, and give me a reporting platform to generate data extracts from. There's nothing niche in any of that, in my opinion. But when we get into the automation type stuff, right? Again, ideally, our strategy right now is we should be working with one partner at the end of this. But I'll say now, for this first big, so our global migration off of legacy system to our new system is scheduled for September of this year. So only 6 months out. And we are bolting our existing automation platform onto our new system as an interim step, because we don't see an equivalently mature system coming from our solution provider right now. We don't. And this is what's interesting about automation. Once you automate, and I've mentioned here, we've done some impressive work in case handling automation, and it is driving pretty significant benefit into our operations. But now that's a benchmark you can't deviate from. Right? That's where you are, right? That's your starting point now, right? Going back from productivity and cost and efficiency, that baseline is non-negotiable. So in the run up to this, when we were looking at where our partner solution was versus where our solution was, in order to retain the efficiencies that we have in place today, we had to make that decision to retain portions of our legacy estate in our new estate.
And did you do time and motion studies before you went out? Extensive. Actually, it was one of the most extensive data collection efforts I've ever been a part of. We spent months on that. That's a couple years back. That's part of our business case build. But we did sit down, painstaking detail, how many minutes per step are people spending on this in our process. So what happens when you do the time and motion study once? So would you do the time and motion study when you are at the testing phase of the new system, or will you do it once you are live and maybe a few months down the line? When will you do that then?
Right now it's scheduled for after we're live.
Okay.
Let's leave it there. Right now, it's scheduled for after we're live. I don't see it being pulled into being a pre-release situation. That won't be the case. We'll do it after. And why I said I'll leave it there is we'll see where our productivity is with this first release. And look, the idea here is, yes, we have very, very, very high commitments to our senior executive team about what we're doing here. It's not about compliance. It's not about cloud migration. There is a significant amount of efficiency and productivity gain associated with this.
Yeah.
But there isn't this blind expectation that all of that is coming on day one with this big migration. So we will have that conversation with our senior team around where we are, what we get, what we got, what we didn't get, what our plan is to resolve the what we didn't get situation post go live. And then we can kind of like decide again when the best point to start checking in on our productivity is. But we will go through that exercise again at some point in the future to test the benefit and the successful realization of that with this program. And it won't be a one-time exercise. This is going to be something that we'll be expected to do on a recurring basis, whether that's quarterly, whether that's biannually, whether that's annually. We'll decide that later. But it's been very well explained to us that, and we have a model in place. We've already partnered with the senior executive team to put a model in place. What are our KPIs? How are we going to measure it? Those types of things. So yes, we will be measuring our commitments and our productivity sort of delivery after this for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a point that a lot of other sort of senior leaders in PV they kind of miss out, which is, I think there's a lot of talk about efficiencies, automation, AI, ML, large language models, everything, but actually you have to also have a baseline on what you currently have.
Yeah.
To see if any of that is even worth the investment.
I totally agree. Totally agree. And we're kind of so another thing that's going on here is like we kind of started, or at least in the earlier portion of this, talking about like technology and how fast it's coming and how quickly can we actually use it and implement it. And your senior executive teams want it yesterday. Like it's just very. It's a constant piece of work to keep understanding that. Where are we going and where should we be putting our efforts, right? Like we're all so stressed for time and there's so much work going on and everybody has ideas. Like I said, there's no shortage of use cases. So another thing that's going on sort of in my organization is we're trying to, let's say, reinvigorate our innovative spirit, if you will, right? Turning back to, and not, I use the analogy of hammers looking for nails. I feel we take that approach a little too often. We should use ChatGPT. We should use NLP. We should use blockchain. We should use these things. And then we're out searching for what we should be doing with them. The way that we're trying to turn our mindset now is, let's talk about our business problems. And look, it's very true. Finding a good problem is actually quite hard to do. Right? What are the problems we actually should be working on? And not everything needs to be a big boil the ocean thing, right? Like, let's start small. Like, if we really want to use these novel techs in different ways, my opinion is you need to start a little smaller, a little bit more manageable. And the other thing that we need to be better at is we need to be better at failing. And I don't use failing as a negative. That's a positive term. As a matter of fact, in my team, we don't use the word fail. We use the word learn. We learned. We didn't fail. We learned. We need to be more, we have to have a better appetite and appreciation for sometimes this just doesn't pan out to be a concept we should be thinking about anymore, and let's move on. So in parallel with this transformation, changing the old ways of working, implementing new, bringing people along that change journey, trying to reinvigorate the way people think about innovation and how we're framing the problems that we want to tackle, putting a bit of we use the word ecosystem in place. Like, how are we capturing, rating, curating, and deciding with leadership what we should be doing? So all of this it's actually very exciting. And like, just to kind of see where we, like, Indy, I'll tell you, when we first started talking about this business case in 2021, it was not well received at the masses. Like, people did not understand why we need to move. Right? Like, just why do we need to move? We got through that. We got through the emergency. Why do we need to move? To now, everybody's on board. Of course, I get challenges. Of course, people speak up and tell us they don't like certain things or give us. I want that. I welcome those things. It's not, in my mind, in any type of a toxic way here. Like, everybody is on board to be successful of this, which is You asked me about how do we manage this change in expectation. That makes it a lot easier in of itself, that people are willing and understanding the need for this, and we can work through our challenges in a positive way.
Fascinating. So this is my final question. I always ask everyone the same question, and I think it's going to be very interesting coming from you, which is, what's next for PV?
So if this door was open and the people outside of it would hear me say it, is data, right? Like, Yes, we're laying down foundational systems. Yes, we're implementing automation to reduce manual efforts and drive cost efficiencies and productivity gains and shorten turnaround times of our case handling process. And we're trying to implement more modern reporting solutions to maybe move more towards, I always say self-service, and everybody always says self-service until they really see what self-service is. But we are trying to move to a more, at least empowering scientists and physicians to utilize the tool directly, as opposed to coming to a group of specialists, which is kind of what our model is now, right? So that's all kind of like foundation and, dare I say, operational and transactional, if you will. But when I look at the use cases that are coming in, it's data, right? I as a safety physician, need to layer clinical trial, non-serious clinical trial on top of the serious cases I have in my database. I want to look at lab values. I want to look at real world data. I want claims. I want EHR. I want all this stuff. And when I look at those, right, like I want to identify a signal faster. Well, the only way you do that is to have more data, to look more places, right? So this is kind of like my big hang up this year is data. What is our data strategy? When is this concept of us having direct availability of data that we're authorized to have access to? When is that coming? Because being completely frank, I'm struggling with moving on some of these things because of that immediate rate limiting step, right? So we want to look all these places, but we're kind of hindered at jump in getting to the places we want to look. And then we could have a whole nother conversation about what comes out of the back of that, right? Like the surveillance area is I love surveillance, and I'm really looking forward to kind of getting the transactional piece laid down so we can turn our attention more to those scientific use cases. Like, but all of those are science. They're all data in nature, right? So, but the duality of that operation is always very interesting to me. We want to look more places. We want to cast wider nets. We want to find more starfish, if you will, right? But we don't want to drag back any more rocks. We don't want to spend any time on any noise, right? We want to look more places, but we don't want to exert more manpower on false positives, right? So that's always like that duality of looking more places, but being really precise in what you're pulling back, because you don't really want to pull back stuff that people don't care about. I know I'm saying it very bluntly, but noise means something we shouldn't have looked at. False positive means something humans shouldn't have looked at it in the future state. So that's kind of what's next for PV in my mind, is getting through this transformation for the rest of this year and the early part of next, and really beginning to dig into these more high science use cases in a much deeper way. And my analytics team can't wait for it. My TA scientists can't, but like all of them want it. We're just building this foundation to try to make it a reality.
Bill, I feel like I could do a 5-part series with you. It's been absolutely fascinating talking to you today. Thank you for coming on.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Anytime. It was a fun conversation. And as I said, I generated a couple insights in this as well, just talking through things. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, everyone.